Welcome to Around the Empire, the show that takes you around the U.S. Empire. I'm your host, Dan Wright.
I'm your co-host, Joanne Leal.
And on today's show, April 19th, 2017, we speak with Kyle Kulinski of Secular Talk about the establishment's war on independent media and what people like Kyle are doing to fight back. Here is that interview. Today, we're speaking with Kyle Kulinski. You probably know him on the YouTube channel Secular Talk to talk about media concentration and the seemingly coordinated strategy to destroy some independent media. How you doing, Kyle?
I'm doing well. Thanks so much for having me. I appreciate it.
Hi, Kyle.
Hello. How are you?
Great.
Okay, so let's kind of dive into, I want to use your situation as well as talk about our situation and see if there's some parallels.
Sure.
So Shadowproof situation was we were put on essentially a blacklist of sites that a group named ProporNot, who nobody knows exactly who these people are. Adrian Chen of the New Yorker said he talked to some of them. Some of them were former State Department. Some of them were interested in Ukraine. That's kind of as deep into it as a guy. But we were put on this, we were blacklisted. We were also blacklisted on a plugin. And we are probably on a list somewhere that Facebook is now going to use to label stories put on its platform as conspiracy theorist or fake news. I just want to say we're not fake news, but what's interesting from my perspective, and one of the things we said by a lot of organizations like the Washington Post and other legacy media or establishment media is this fake news stuff looks like a pretext to shut down competitors or dissenting voices. And where you come in and your channel, which is very popular on YouTube, people talk about it a lot. They also follow you on Twitter. Recently, I would call them hit pieces, were put out by the Wall Street Journal against actually a few YouTube stars. PewDiePie was also listed as someone who has extremist content. Yeah. And what seems to have happened after that is they put pressure indirectly, or the Wall Street Journal did with these stories, on advertisers. And then YouTube, which is Google, basically tweaked the algorithm to such a degree that it essentially turned off ads. And I know your show, David Pakman, flagged. Now, in these two instances, you have the threat of fake news and the threat of advertisers getting roped into being shown in front of extremist content. But behind the scenes, in each case, you have the Washington Post and the Wall Street Journal, two legacy media outlets that compete with independent media. So from your perspective, Kyle, do you see any parallels there? And do you see that perhaps some less than pure motives in this crackdown?
Yeah, at the very, very, very least, you could say it is mighty convenient for old media because, I mean, when you look at YouTube, it's almost like the perfect storm of new media that would just scare the pants off of old media because you have this system where, you have independent content creators and they put their stuff out there. And basically the way it works is the more views you get in this really open free marketplace on YouTube, the more money you make through ads. And what I always thought was brilliant about YouTube is there's a giant firewall and a buffer between the content creators and the advertisers. So none of the content creators are selling out. They don't feel compromised in any way. They don't bend their opinion. They say whatever they want to say. And then, okay, if they get the eyeballs, then they get the ads and then they make the money. Well, like you just described, there's this massive crackdown and this giant demonetization of news and politics almost across the board. And it all starts with, these things always start with like a little itty-bitty kernel of truth. So they say, well, look, we found this ad on this neo-Nazi link channel and these old giant corporations are really upset about that. I think a Kraft ad ran in front of some sort of neo-Nazi content or whatever. And as a result of that, there were the pressure put from old media on the advertisers and the advertisers fled. And so the kernel of truth is, does any advertiser really want to be in front of neo-Nazi content? Of course not. But what they do is they apply a solution that's mighty convenient for old media because the solution creates a bigger problem, but it's a problem for us and not for them. It's a solution for them because what happens is they'll lump in, the alt-right and neo-Nazi creators alongside, say, Bernie supporters and alongside, leftists who are fighting to try to make the world a better place. And, one of the things that I always bring up is that whenever I would speak about ISIS, whenever I would speak about Syria, whenever I'd speak about Iraq, and I could be as informational and educational as humanly possible, and it could be a segment where I come out clearly in favor of peace. Like, let's not be at war. And that would be demonetized and treated as if I just did a video where I came out in favor of an ISIS beheading. And yes, the thing is, you can see how, like I said, at the very least, it's just mighty convenient for old media. But of course, there's a possibility that it's even more nefarious than that, because when it comes to YouTube, it just so happened that at the same time they demonetized all these independent news and politics creators, they shifted a tremendous amount of ad revenue to YouTube TV. YouTube TV, of course, they rolled out this thing where they made a deal with a lot of old media companies. And when you look at who's part of YouTube TV, it's just TV. So you have people who fled TV to go to like YouTube and the internet and outlets like yours and ours because they thought we were providing something that TV just simply wasn't providing. And then now YouTube, one of the biggest mediums in this front, they decided, let's destroy that whole model. Let's get rid of what made it great, and let's shift the ad dollars back to the old media companies. And again, like you pointed out, wow, isn't that curious that it just so happened to be the fact that old media companies were really the ones who launched this effort with their hit pieces on YouTube, and you had the advertisers respond accordingly. And remember, 99.99% of the time, you're not going to get any ads on extremist content. If anything, the opposite is the problem, where you have stuff that's not extremist content, but it gets caught up in this massive dragnet, and it drags down channels like mine and others.
Right. And speaking of transitioning, there is a parallel again with Facebook, which is Facebook has a program called Publish on Facebook Directly. This
Right.
was, and now many people, including myself, said to legacy media friends and colleagues, hey, this is a trap. You don't want to do this. You don't want Facebook to actually own the platform. And they said, no. We're going to get something by being in this partnership. Now, part of me thinks maybe what you get is they're going to label your competitors fake news. But what we found out is corresponding to this fake news crackdown, there has been an exodus from this platform. I think The Verge did a story on this, that everyone is leaving. They're not getting any bang for their buck. They're just surrendering their content to Facebook, and they're not getting paid much for it. So maybe you have to wonder, well, what can Facebook offer them other than direct money, which is what
Right.
you think they would ask for? Well, Facebook can do stuff like label the people that you compete with as not real journalists, as fakers. So once again, this is not proven. I'm just looking at the circumstantial aspect of this and saying, man, this crackdown is occurring. And I didn't even know about the YouTube TV angle.
Yep.
Which would seem to play into this narrative that there is essentially a commercial program being run, or a commercial opportunity being taken by legacy media under the guise of, we're protecting you from extremism, we're
Right.
protecting you from fake content.
So that Washington Post just bizarre Orwellian list that you were put on, isn't it, again, how convenient that in their mind, all of the media that's credible media just happens to be corporate media. Whereas, anything that might legitimately be bad, like super far right outlets, whatever, World Net Daily and things like that. Okay, a terrible outlet. But what they do is they lump in those kinds of outlets with, again, Truth Out, Truth Dig. If they
Naked
wanted
capitalism has done some
Exactly.
of the best work on the financial crisis. They were labeled, and they threatened to sue.
And then meanwhile, now let's look at the flip side of that also. Remember how CNBC covered the economy in the lead up to the subprime mortgage crisis and the Great Recession? They made it seem like everything was fine. Don't worry. When everything was collapsing, they were still saying, so you're telling me we're going to have a network where they say, oh, this is the financial expert network here. And then none of them saw the subprime mortgage crisis coming. What that means is that's fake news. They don't follow the facts. They don't understand how the economy works. They're just a bunch of people propped up by their corporate overlords to give talking points in favor of corporate America. But again, they stay on the, CNBC's off that list. CNBC is, serious. It's a large platform and it's corporate media, so we take it serious. But like you just said, Naked Capitalism and other outlets that covered it way more accurately, they're put on the list and they're basically blacklisted and treated as so-called fake news because it suits the purposes of corporate media.
Right. And when corporate media makes mistakes, big mistakes, let's even, talk about the Iraq war always comes up, but, they don't pay any real penalty for that, or that they have fabulous, right? I mean, they have people who straight up made, Jason Blair
totally
said he was reporting from Baghdad. He never left New York.
Right.
You have Judith Miller, who in an interview, the New York Times reporter who did the page one story that Dick Cheney referenced when talking about weapons of mass destruction, say, it's not my job to figure out if the government's claims are correct. It's my job to accurately quote government officials. Now,
so he's a stenographer.
Right. Well, but I mean, that's like the definition of it. So,
yeah.
I mean, is it even news? Why not just cut out the middleman completely and have the U.S. government have its own? But in any case, yes. So the corporate media has these essentially two standards, and a standard for everybody else and one for themselves. And that's really my read on it. And I just wonder what happens if they're successful enough to crush their competitors, because I don't think they're going to gain the trust back. That's the thing that makes it very interesting, because it's not like people left for a reason, right?
Absolutely. So first, let me just go back real quick, because I want to give two more examples to this point. So you have Syria, what's happening in Syria right now. And you have, I just covered a story on my show the other day where Reuters had an article about how Wall Street banker, Goldman Sachs guy, Gary Cohn is pushing Trump in a, quote, moderate direction. And then you read in the article, but when they say moderate, what they mean is, Gary Cohn is making him do massive deregulation. He's making him do a corporate tax deal. So moderate to who? Moderate to Goldman Sachs. That's who it's moderate for. The American people aren't in favor of this, but Reuters basically ran a piece from Goldman Sachs' perspective, and they didn't even mention the fact that Gary Cohn got hundreds of millions of dollars when he left Goldman Sachs. And then what do you think he's going to do now that he's in government and he's a top economic advisor? He's going to rig the rules in favor of Goldman Sachs and Wall Street. So it's just a total fluff piece. And with Syria, all of a sudden now, Fareed Zakaria, now Trump is a serious president. I think he became president because he bombed the Syrian government. Brian Williams, I'm reminded of how beautiful our missiles are. It's just so beautiful. You want to talk about fake news? Here's fake news right here. Now,
Brian Williams.
Yeah, Brian Williams. Exactly. The biggest thing recently was, you lied. But to me, this stuff is even worse than that. Like, okay, so you told a personal lie about being on a helicopter or something, whatever. But this is like, you're cheerleading a war. It's a country that didn't attack us, that doesn't even factor into their breakdown of the situation. And yes, you're right that so how can they get the trust back? They can't, because here's the deal. I often make this comparison to Wolf Blitzer because he's just such a comical shell of a human being. They prop him up and put him on CNN, and he's a robot and he reads the prompter. I remember one time, I think he was talking to Rand Paul, and he was concerned about the profit margins of defense contractors when Rand Paul said, hey, maybe it's not a good idea to give chemical weapons to the Saudi Arabian government as they use them on kids in Yemen. And we'll say, well, what are jobs and profit for the companies? So here's the deal. If somebody put Wolf Blitzer on YouTube and let's see how he fares. A marketplace where you start with 0 people listening to you, and then you got to build it up from scratch, and you got to work hard, and you got to come up with something that's entertaining and informational. And he wouldn't be able to do it. Meanwhile, when were effectively put on the YouTube blacklist, where we had 475,000 views in one day, which beats many CNN shows in the key demographic. And we had a 99% cut in revenue. What happened with us? Well, we reached out to the audience and I said, look, here's the deal. This is unsustainable. And so if you guys like what you hear, help me out. You can go to Patreon and just give $2 a month. It works out to like a cent per video. And you know what happened? People rushed over to Patreon and they donated because they said, I think this is of value. And that means quite a bit to me. But as you were alluding to there, we're really dealing with, this isn't just about me. This is about, bigger factors at play here where people are realizing that there's this struggle going on between old corporate media, who has all the institutional power and all the money in the world, and independent new media, which in many instances is fighting for the truth and trying to make the world a better place, but they're chronically underfunded and undercut by the momentum of this old system, which has their boot on our neck.
Right. I mean, there's a sort of institutional momentum, which is a weird thing to think about because it's standing still behind these guys to crush their competitors. And they've become more. And what I kind of think about is it seems like there's been a dance here between old media and new media for a while. And in fairness, old media's own incompetence has killed them. I mean, like the newspaper industry, I mean, they just blew it. And by the way, I say this as they didn't have to give Google their free content. They didn't have to do that. There was a lot of people who said this is a terrible idea. So they made mistakes, but now there's been a rapprochement. And what they've done is basically what big corporations always think they can do, which is buy their way out of a problem. So they've bought into Vox Media. Comcast has a major stake. They've made major investments in BuzzFeed and these other sites. And they basically have these old executives who don't really know what to do. They're just saying, okay, buy it, right? You saw AOL buy the Huffington Post. And you see all these plays going on. And it seems like they're kind of figuring out that wave of mergers and acquisitions didn't work. And the last thing they don't want to seem to accept, which is I think your good point about Wolf Blitzer, is people like your show and other shows like that precisely because it's not connected with Comcast and Viacom and these other places. So there's no way to really root around it. Now, I guess there is a corporate strategy for that, which is to just not really disclose that you own something, right? Have a brand on top of it. So they would never disclose it. But even that seems not to have worked out. So I guess I kind of, on the one hand, you could say, look how much power these old institutions have. They got Facebook and YouTube to crush their competitors or to attack their competitors. On the other hand, you can look at it like, look how desperate they are. They've done everything this, including just straight up, bribery, and tried to co-opt and buy people out, and they still can't get a foothold.
And not just desperate, clueless too. The timing of this is, I find, very curious. It seems to have just started in the past few months, and really
right after the election.
And really
coincidence.
Right. So basically, as I was talking to Dan earlier, I mean, it's as if they just realized that independent media had gained a real foothold and had some real influence, especially among their coveted demographic, that they are basically having no luck getting to. But basically, I mean, we all knew that independent media was gaining momentum. I mean, for a couple of years now, at least. Who didn't know that? I think the answer to who's behind this, in my opinion, and of course this is speculation, the answer to who's behind this is who just realized that independent media was a threat to them. And that's when I wonder if there's a partisan aspect to this as well, because when you look at the election, and why now? Why exactly right now? Now, the launch of YouTube TV, that's I hadn't thought of that. That's a factor that I hadn't brought into it. And also Facebook Live is pretty new, too. But to me, the biggest obvious answer is the Hillary Clinton campaign is the one that didn't realize that independent media had such a strong impact, and the Democratic Party.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right in that it's the establishment of both parties, I think, where and the best example, like you said, is Hillary, because think about the reaction to the DNC email leaks. I mean, I've never seen such ridiculous hackery in mainstream media, in the sense that all they would do is focus on the fact that there were leaks, and they frame that as, oh my goodness, there were these leaks, and these leaks, like Chris Cuomo said, it is illegal to even have these leaks, which is not true. But they would focus on how there was some sort of egregious wrong done to the DNC and Debbie Wasserman Schultz and to Hillary Clinton. And what that is a trick, because whenever you have somebody talking about the fact that there were leaks about something, as opposed to the substance of those leaks, what they're doing is deflecting from the substance of those leaks. This is the same trick that we saw with Edward Snowden. Edward Snowden releases the information that the government is basically taking all of our metadata and spying on us. And what happened? Well, they tried to deflect and say, oh, there were leaks and Snowden's a criminal for releasing the leaks. But they don't tell you, that mainstream media doesn't want to tell you, well, here's what's in the leaks. And what we're learning is that the government is acting in a brazenly unconstitutional way, and your Fourth Amendment rights no longer apply. Now, with Hillary Clinton and the DNC, we learned, for example, that Debbie Wasserman Schultz was pressuring the media on MSNBC and saying, I really don't like the way that you're treating me and Hillary. Maybe I go talk to your boss. She said this to the Morning Joe people. We learned that they tried to atheist shame Bernie Sanders in the Midwest because, hey, it's a religious area and Bernie's polling well. So how about you just use this hack argument of he might be an atheist and I'm religious, so come and vote for me.
But they didn't pressure the independent media, did they? They didn't think they needed to.
They can't because we don't listen. We're not going to listen to their BS.
I mean, there's another parallel here. It happened in the 2000s, right after Obama was elected. And there were some really strong blogger voices at the time, kind of a parallel to today's independent media. And after Obama was elected, they basically created these common purpose meetings. They pulled all the influential bloggers and activist groups that had formed. They pulled them all together and they tried to, there's a famous incident where Rahm has a tirade against Democrat versus Democrat attacks. And he said it was effing stupid. And
is that where these guys are effing retarded? Is that where that meme came from?
Progressives.
Yeah.
But it's where the term veal pen came from, because what they did was once they finally realized that these bloggers were something they had to pay attention to, they pulled them all together and tried to pull them into line. And when they wouldn't do that, then they used their network of donors and foundations and everything. And they said, don't give these people any money at all.
That's right.
Cut off the funds. And they did. And so then they starved these organizations for a while. And as you know, the progression of what happened to the progressive movement was it got co-opted. A lot of the most influential websites and bloggers became very pro-establishment. They started fighting against the dissidents. Now, I don't know why, whether they took funding, whether, suddenly their funding came back, as long as they maybe they were conditioned to, if we, you know what I mean?
Yes.
So is that happening again here? I mean, we have seen it happen before. And I mean, certainly there are strong ties between the Democratic Party and the media, seems to me, at least most of the media, the Republicans. And as you say, the Democrats and establishment Republicans are very hard to tell the difference between
absolutely.
them.
I think it is happening again.
So I think what the next step is going to be is first starve independent media and then try to buy the different little outlets. But as you pointed out, they have a real problem with that. Or as Dan pointed out, I mean, you can buy these personalities. If someone approaches you and tries to buy you in some way, maybe a subtle way, they can't just take you and put you on CNN. I mean, it just can't do that. So how would they utilize the assets that they buy if that's the route that they go? Maybe they just destroy you, but also be pretty useful to them because they have another problem. They have a trust problem.
Yeah, I think they let it go for a little too long, and some of these people are too established where they could just go directly to the grassroots, and the grassroots says, we got your back, So. And there are going to be some of lower moral standing who might say, you know what? Yeah, I'll basically sell out. But there's a lot who are just not going to do that and who maybe would be crushed in a traditional sense and a reputational sense, and that there could be smear jobs and hack jobs from the mainstream media against them, and it would succeed. But there are a lot of people in new media now who have just kind of become their own entity and for the better, and it just can't be stopped. But what we're describing here is really a problem that's as old as media, period, because I'm reminded in this whole conversation, what I'm reminded of is Noam Chomsky's Manufacturing Consent, because what's happening is whenever anything gets corporatized, there's these hierarchical layers. And what happens is it's not like overt that you have people going, "Mwahaha, we will find people to do government propaganda." But what you have is everybody's got a boss, and the buck all stops with top management at these corporations. And all they care about, first and foremost, is the bottom line of that corporation. And one of the things they do is buy politicians to give them special tax breaks. So you have the corporations that are in bed with the government, and you have the hiring practices for these old media companies. When you look at who they pick, it's just very simply, it's people who won't rock the boat. That's why you have Wolf Blitzer. That's why you have Don Lemon. You're not going to see an impassioned segment from either one of them where they're talking about how half the country makes $30,000 a year or less, and this is a crisis. You're not going to have them talk about the fact that it's outrageous that we're the only modern nation that doesn't have a single-payer system. These are real issues, and they're not going to be spoken about because there are subtle layers of filtration where you're only going to get the people who toe the government line but don't even realize that they're towing the government line, which is why, Noam said oftentimes in corporate media, you get a media that's even more subservient to the government than in many nations where it is literal state media, which is a chilling thought, but it's absolutely true when you look at the lead up to the Iraq War, when you look at the lead up to, what's happening in Syria now. I mean, it really is amazing how obedient they are and how well the system works in the sense that they have the layers of filtration and they just basically fire people who rock the boat and they dismiss them as, oh, they're just crazy. So, the Overton window is solidly pro-establishment, and that's what you're going to get. When you look at Fox News, they're the propaganda arm of the Republican Party. You look at MSNBC, they're the propaganda arm of the Democratic Party. So you don't even have, and CNN's both. They do the neutrality bias where they do the propaganda for both. But you don't even have like a true conservative opinion that's a philosophically conservative opinion because Fox News just does propaganda for the Republican Party. And you don't have a true progressive or liberal mainstream media opinion because they're just doing, the propaganda for the Democratic Party. So the Overton window is the one thing that it is for sure is solidly pro-establishment. And I think that you can't pull the wool over people's eyes anymore because they see through it.
There's a great case study here. When MSNBC hired, I think you're affiliated with the Young Turks, if I'm correct.
Yes, I'm in the network,
okay.
Sure.
Okay, you're in the network. So they brought on Cenk Uygur to be a anchor on MSNBC, thinking that they were going to grab his audience because the Young Turks, because it's a YouTube-based thing, has a younger audience. It's an audience they want. And Cenk resigned, was fired, some sort of in-between corporate maneuver. But when he went up to talk to Griffin, who at that time was the head of MSNBC, Phil Griffin, he may still be.
He is, yes.
Yeah. Griffin basically, in an indirect way, gave the Chomskyan analysis of I've internalized the values of the system by saying, Cenk, we're the establishment. This is when you actually, it's like a literal quote from what I said. And we don't take on this antagonistic tone that you're taking on, which is to say that if there were other DNC email leaks earlier, we would have probably seen people at the DNC and elsewhere calling MSNBC executives saying, this guy Cenk Uygur is blasting the Democratic Party on the network that's supposed to be giving us a fair deal. What the hell's up? He needs to tone it down. And that's what, in fact, what Phil Griffin said. It's about your tone.
That's right.
Tone issue. So there you have, case in point, a great case study in this dynamic playing out where you've got a guy from independent media, from YouTube, who built an audience. That's the other thing you have to wonder. Like, okay, so you buy these people out, you co-opt them, and Cenk kind of stayed true to his credit. But say they didn't stay true. Is the audience going to follow them over? I'm not so sure. It's not a cult of personality here. They like these guys because they're independent. If they stop being independent, the audience might go away too. So it's kind of a catch-22. But
that's their dilemma. I mean, they have a dilemma.
Dilemma is the real problem, but also it's Chomskyism 101 for him to have said, we're the establishment and we don't like your tone.
That's right, because it's the elitists and the establishment versus the people. And what you have is the CEOs and the owner class of these big old media corporations. They basically go to the same parties as the senators and as the congressmen and as the establishment in Washington. And what you're going to get on the air with old media is a picture of the world that's painted that's the same picture that the people in those rooms want you to see. So, every now and then they might cover a real story, but it's rare. And usually what they're doing is they're focusing more on the he said, she said, horse race aspect of politics, or they're doing sensationalism for no reason. There could be a story about Kim Kardashian on CNN because they think it'll get them eyeballs. But that's why that's the problem for them is that they left this giant hole in the market for people who actually care about the news and care about making the world a better place. By design, they cannot have those kinds of people on air because it would threaten their bottom line.
And they leave out stuff like, so for example, yes, they cover Kim Kardashian. Yes, they cover celebrity news. But what they don't cover, and this is from an analysis that was done, are things like the Telecommunications Act of 1996.
Sure.
Or SOPA. Or the ISP. We only learned about this after the fact that the ISPs have been given the legal right to sell your search history. Now, why is that? So it's not just they love these cocktail parties. I think that's part of it. It's not just that they internalize the values. That's part of it too. It's that they have an agenda as media conglomerates to pad their bottom line. And these senators and politicians who they're supposed to be holding accountable are the people who make those decisions for them. So how tough are you going to be on someone who's going to determine whether you make an extra $1 billion this year? Not too tough.
Yeah, and look at the money that they all the politicians took from the internet service providers. I mean, this happens, and this isn't just in media. This is in every single industry you could think of. If you follow the money, there's always a reason why. Okay, so now, most of the Democrats, the elected Democrats, are still against single payer. Well, dig a little deeper, you find that many of these Democrats are taking money from private health insurance companies. Cory Booker was against the bill that would lower the cost of pharma drugs. Well, you find out Big Pharma is huge in New Jersey, and he took campaign contributions from them. Hillary Clinton and other Democrats, they love to play the game of every now and then using rhetoric against Wall Street, but devil's always in the details. And when you dig deeper, you find out, she's taken tremendous amounts of money from Wall Street. My favorite with Hillary is she used to say during the campaign, we need to get dark, unaccountable money out of politics. And I'd always go, whoa. Why did you just slip in the words dark and unaccountable? Because what that means is, what she's saying is, we need more transparency as to who's bribing the politicians. In other words, allow them to still bribe them, but just tell me who's bribing them. No, that's not enough, Hillary. We want money out of politics, because that's the only way. If we have clean elections, that's the only way we're going to get principled politicians who represent the people. But this is the system that we're dealing with, where we have the politicians across the board are so bought by corporations and billionaires that it's no wonder why, you look at the approval rating of Congress, and sometimes it's 9% it was at one point. 9%, and it's in a democracy. I mean, these are numbers that if we saw them in Russia or something, we would laugh and talk about how it's a banana republic and a crazy authoritarian regime. But somehow our oligarchy and our corporatocracy is still viewed as, lovely and a beacon of democracy when these are the results.
Shiny beacon on a hill.
And remember, what's interesting is Western Europe solved its bribery problems by making campaigns publicly financed.
That's right. That's clean elections. Exactly.
Right. America solved its bribery problem by legalizing bribery.
And the arguments fall apart so quickly under even a minimal amount of scrutiny. So you get these corporate sellout, frankly, idiot far-right judges on the Supreme Court. And from the 1970s and on, there's been like 3 or 4 different Supreme Court decisions that solidified this idea that money equals speech. But again, just simple, basic, logical deductions and philosophical arguments just make their points crumble. So if money equals speech, then why isn't prostitution legal? Because you're not actually, paying for a prostitute. You're saying, I am giving speech as to how much I enjoy sex. This isn't money, it's speech. I'm just saying how much I like sex, so it's totally legal. Why can't you go buy crystal meth? You're not actually buying crystal meth. You're just expressing with speech how much you enjoy crystal. So it's just, they don't even try to be consistent in the arguments. It's the total takeover of the billionaire class and of the corporations, and where our concerns, the concern of the people and what's supposed to be a democracy, is just left out of the equation, like that Princeton study, which found that the U.S. functions as an oligarchy. There's no correlation between what the majority of the American people want, what the middle class and poor people want, and what we end up getting when it comes to policy.
And you notice that the mainstream discourse writes out class politics.
Always.
But class politics gives you the perfect explanation for that Princeton study and this dynamic we're talking about, because the vast majority of the public, over 60% in polling, say they favor a millionaire's tax. And a majority of members of Congress now are millionaires.
That's right.
Now, if you're looking for a contrast in public sentiment and private interests in elected office, it's the fact that the vast majority of the public favors a millionaire's tax, and the majority of Congress are millionaires, which means they'd have to pay the tax. So I think without class politics, you don't really understand anything.
Oh, exactly. And it really is amazing because when you go issue for issue, it's striking how it's virtually every issue they're ignoring when the people have clear opinions. So, for example, single payer, there's just a new poll I saw yesterday. I'll be covering it soon. 60% of the American people are in favor of Medicare for all. You have 80% of the American people who want to raise the minimum wage. You have 90% of the American people who want a universal background check on gun purchases. I'm telling you, 60% want to legalize marijuana now. So you go down the list, and basically the progressive priorities are really just the priorities of America.
I've been saying that for years.
Progressivism is honestly just the centrist position in America among the people. And it is just totally unreflected in Washington. And again, if the corporate media was doing their job, this would be something they'd be screaming at the top of their lungs every day. You'd turn on CNN, MSNBC, Fox News, and they would just show you, here are the opinion polls, what the American people believe. Here's the fact that we don't get any of this into law. And that's, again, their failure, which is why there's such a giant hole in the marketplace that people like us step into, because it's just such an abysmal failure that anybody could see through it who cares even a little bit about news and politics.
I think that what it all boils down to is another dilemma, corruption. When you have such a concentration of wealth and power, you can't avoid corruption. It's just going to happen. But where does corruption lead? Corruption always leads to incompetence. You destroy the meritocracy, and then you become incompetent. And, I think that's their other dilemma.
Totally. And when you look at, there's a certain level of wealth that it just defies all logic and reason, and it's just setting up a systemic collapse. And I remember there was a fact going back to the Great Depression about income inequality that I thought was fascinating because it shows you about where that level is, where it's just unsustainable, and it would actually be even in the benefit of the robber barons and the elite class to do redistribution. Right. So I think the fact is it was about 24% or 25% of the income in the country was going to the top 1% right before the Great Depression. Then we had the Great Depression, and then during the stable period afterwards, when we had the New Deal and we had stronger unions, what's called the golden age of economic expansion, the percentage of income that the top 1% was making went all the way down to about 12%. So when the top 1% was making 12% of the income, things were fairly stable. When it got kicked up to 24%, 25%, there were these giant systemic imbalances, and basically the middle class and the poor didn't have enough money to buy the goods that are produced by the so-called, captains of industry. And guess what? Right before the Great Recession, we were right back to the top 1% making 24% of the income. So what we need to do, it's an argument that's beneficial for everybody. To say raise taxes on the rich, have a progressive tax rate, have strong social safety nets, that's not just in the benefit of the middle class and the poor. In the long run, that's in the benefit of the rich too, because it is true that absolute power corrupts absolutely, and there is such a thing as too much money. I mean, when you look at the world over right now, the richest 8 people have just as much wealth as the bottom 3.6 billion combined. 8 people as much wealth as half the world. I mean, there's no argument there that, those 8 people just worked really harder than everybody else. That's just a ridiculous idea.
Well, and in the Walton family's case, so the Walton family, the heirs of Walmart, have more wealth than the bottom 150 million Americans. Right? Just that family has more money than the bottom 150 million Americans. And we know they didn't work hard for it. They inherited it.
That's right.
Sam Walton was the entrepreneur. They weren't the entrepreneur. And what you're talking about is so important because what they discovered, at least, or what I think the analysis you're talking about is, once the rich get this much share of the income, they hit a consumption limit. They can only buy so much stuff. So they take that gain and pump it into bubbles in the financial markets.
Right.
Because they don't know what else to do with the money. They've bought as many houses as they think they want. They've bought as many cars. Whereas when that's more evenly distributed, the middle class has consumption hopes. They could actually buy a second car. It'd be a big deal. They could buy a second home, a shore house or something. They could invest in their children's education and spend it. So when we lock that money up there, rich people just blow these big financial bubbles and then they pop and we get things like the Great Recession. So it is on the long run better. Not that they'd have to check their greed, and I don't think this Congress is going to do it.
They go to other parts of the world too, to emerging markets.
Oh, right.
Yes.
They try to impose their will on the rest of the world. There's a lot of things they are still can do with that money. But in order to even things out, so that let's say that the top 1% or 0.1%, let's say that they do understand that it's in their best interest to change this balance. Well, I mean, things have been so crazy lately. And I think everybody in the whole world is just like, what is going on in America? I mean, is it possible that they realize this and that there's a fight going on how to make that happen?
No. We have to make them realize it. That's the point. And that's, again, to get back to the media thing, why it's so critical that outlets like ours continue to get our message out. Because, so take, what we're doing with Justice Democrats. There's basically this group that I co-founded, and the idea behind it is to have the Bernie wing essentially take over the Democratic Party and basically force them to be what they should have been all along. And when you want to talk about an impact, so we started this petition recently. It's justicedemocrats.com/single payer. And what happened is Representative John Conyers proposed a bill, H.R. 676. It's a Medicare for All bill. When he proposed it, 72 Democrats were co-sponsors. So that means over 100 were not. So one of the things I did, one of the things Cenk Uygur of TYT did, and all the different people affiliated with Justice Democrats, we went out there and we said, here's the petition, go sign the petition. I made a direct plea to the audience to call their congressman or congresswoman and tell them, listen, if you don't support this, we're just not going to vote for you. Sorry, but this is a no-brainer. Medicare for All is a no-brainer. So basically support it or else. And what happened? So far, we've moved 24 different Democratic Congress people to be for Medicare for All. And we're not done yet. Yesterday on the show, I went after Dianne Feinstein because she said at a town hall that, she wasn't in favor of single payer. I called her office live on air and I said, listen, I'm one of the top progressive hosts in the country, and if you don't support this, people are not going to vote for you, and you're going to lose.
Remember Grover Norquist says
yes, that? Yes. Except we're doing it for the right reason. So basically, the point is we have to drag the establishment to the right position because they're simply not going to go willingly. Look at women's suffrage. Look at the Civil Rights Act. Look at the Voting Rights Act. People always feel like, come on, it's just impossible to get these things done. It's impossible until you get it done. All it requires is we have the numbers on our side. That's the point. So when we all say, that's it, no, we're done with this. We're not fooling around anymore. We're going to have Medicare for All. We're going to get money out of politics. We can win. It's just a matter of putting in the effort and putting in the time and being patient and persistent in the fight. But there's no way that there's going to be a split within the establishment, and there will be some people in the establishment that have, that are better people who go, let's fix this. Nope, we're going to have to make them fix it.
Yeah, it's the Frederick Douglass, power concedes nothing without demand.
Right.
It never has and it never will. And for people I know people feel really very demoralized after the Bernie Sanders stuff. I'm in my 30s now. I can remember when gay marriage was a completely ridiculous idea, and now it's the law. So, things can change very quickly. And I also remember the Democratic Party being very lukewarm about the idea, and now suddenly they all say it's a civil rights issue of our time.
By the way, 35% supported gay marriage in 2006, which is not that long ago. It was only 35% favorability rating. Now it's 60%. So you're right. It's all a matter of getting the arguments out there, raising consciousness, raising awareness. But I think the most important part is that next step, because I think the people are already kind of with us on the values and the policies we want. The next step is the hardest, which is actually harnessing, organizing, and mobilizing. Because let's face it, people are very, very busy, and they're trying to pay the bills, they're trying to take care of their kids, and there's a million things everybody's got going on. But if we really do apply the pressure, we really do organize, and the grassroots starts moving on this stuff, I think it's absolutely possible, if not likely, that sooner or later we're going to get single payer, we're going to get free college, we're going to get paid vacation time, we're going to get money out of politics, all these things that are so important that honestly many other modern nations have already beaten us to. I mean, Slovenia has free college. Not only do we not have free college, we have a student loan debt crisis. We're over $1 trillion in student loan debt, and you have senior citizens who are still paying off student loan debt because they can't even file bankruptcy on it. So once people know how screwed over they are, and we get mobilizing, then it's just a matter of time.
Yeah, with HR 676, is that the same one that was on during the Obama years?
No.
There's a single payer bill that's been on the books for quite a while. And I was pretty active in the healthcare fight when Obamacare was being negotiated. And when the Democrats had a full majority in both houses, the single payer bill that had many, many sponsors, they refused to bring it for a vote. And the support for it melted when it could actually be done. So it's not enough to just get sponsors for these bills.
Yeah, but that's the litmus test. That's why the litmus test thing he's talking about works. That's why it works for Grover Norquist, because they sign. I don't know if he's got a pledge. Do you make him sign a pledge?
I don't know if they've signed a pledge, but we've gotten them to co-sponsor the bill.
Okay.
Perhaps that is something we should do as well. And for the record here, I know exactly what you're referring to. The Democrats had a supermajority, and not only did they not push for single payer, even though they had the numbers, they didn't even really push for a public option, which is just watered down single payer, and they went all the way to Mitt Romney's plan. So I hear you 100% on that. And here's the thing: this is why we need real progressives to be elected, because Obama, he didn't know how to play, nor did he care enough to fight for something like single payer. He didn't know how to do FDR politics or LBJ politics, where you call the blue dog Democrats into your office and you say, look, here's the bottom line. If you don't vote for this, your career is over. We're going to pump money into a primary opponent against you. I'm going to personally go there and campaign against you, and you're going to lose. And this is what you do. This is how you fight. But you're right. A lot of these Democrats, these corporate Democrats, are duplicitous, and they're doing it to save their butts. Okay, I'm on board with HR 676. Okay, but then if it actually were to come to a vote and you have the numbers, would you vote for it? And if they don't do that, well, then guess what? We're going to come for them too. Because we're not playing anymore. We're not going to take no for an answer. We have to actually fight for these things. And unfortunately, the Democratic Party has been so corrupted and so weak that even when they had a supermajority, they didn't get the policy they should have gotten. But we have to force them to do it.
Right. And in order to fight for things, you need to be seen. And that's why media and independent media is so important. We've taken a lot of your time already. So as we exit here, any parting words, and want to talk about where people can find you online?
Sure. So they could find me at youtube.com/secular talk. That's basically where the show is. You can follow me on Twitter. It's at Kyle Kulinski, KYLEKULINSKI. And if you like the show, consider donating on Patreon, $2 a month. Got a nice option there just to keep independent media going, because we do not trust YouTube at all anymore. I can guarantee you that.
All right. Well, thank you so much for being on the show, Kyle.
Thanks so much, guys. I appreciate it.
I think what we're doing today, collaboration, is another thing that we can do to fight back.
Sure.
See you later, Kyle. Thanks.
Bye, guys. Thanks so much. I really appreciate it.
And that's our show. Thank you for listening. And I want a special thank you to Kyle Kulinski. Follow him on Twitter at Kyle Kulinski. See him on YouTube. YouTube channel is Secular Talk. And please donate to his show, patreon.com/secular talk. If you'd like to keep supporting independent media, we'd really appreciate it. Visit our Patreon page, patreon.com/around the empire. For as little as $5 a month helps us put on the show. Questions, comments, want to yell at me? Dan at shatterproof.com. And to see more of my and Joanne's work, please visit shatterproof.com. See you next time.
Take care.